Okay. Hi, everybody. Good evening, or whatever time of day it is for you. Um, let's get started. So, this is an Ayurvedic approach to weight loss or weight management, as the case may be. And before we jump into the subject of weight loss or weight management from an Ayurvedic perspective, it's really important to understand how the three doshas operate in the mind and the body in order to grasp how they affect weight gain and weight loss. And then, of course, how we use Ayurvedic principles to correct the imbalance. So, in case you're brand new to Ayurveda, the doshas are the three governing forces in our world that determine our physical traits, our personality traits, our emotional and psychological tendencies, and what type of diet, lifestyle, and environment is best for us. There are three doshas, and they are Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. The doshas are made of the five elements, and you can find a short video on my website about the five elements and also about the three doshas. And I put the links to those videos in the slide right here, and they're also in the comments. And so I would check those out when you can if you need to learn a little bit more about the foundational principles of Ayurvedic medicine, but I'm going to be explaining a lot about that tonight. So first and most importantly, let's talk about Vata's role in Ayurveda and in weight gain and weight loss. Vata is made of the elements of air and ether. And air is the element that governs all movement in nature, in our bodies, and in our minds. Ether is the container for all of the elements. So it's the space around us and through which we connect to others. And I like to help people understand ether by mentioning that it tends to deteriorate the other elements when it increases, and that it increases in our bodies and minds as we age. So that's why our hair, our skin, and our bones become thinner into old age, and also why our minds often become more unstable as we age. So Vata by nature is cold and dry, like air and space. It's mobile, like air, and it's also unstable, like the ever-changing nature of air or wind, and the diminishing quality of space or ether. So if someone has a lot of Vata in what Ayurveda calls their constitution, the unique combination of the doshas with which they were conceived, then they will naturally have thinner bones, thinner skin, and smaller features. They also will have a greater tendency to be unstable in their ability to complete projects, stay on course, remain still for long periods of time, or even to focus on one thing at a time. When severely out of balance, people with a great deal of Vata dosha will experience a greater tendency for fear, worry, and anxiety. Those are considered Vata type of emotions. So someone who's been working on balancing the Vata in their constitution could overcome some or all of these challenges, but they will most likely always be working on these things. These things will be tendencies for them. So these individuals who naturally have a lot of Vata dosha in their constitutions often have a harder time gaining weight due to the variable nature of air and the diminishing quality of ether. Their digestion tends to be variable, which makes it harder to absorb nutrients, and therefore it's harder to produce tissue, so fat tissue, muscle, bone tissue, etc., from the food they eat. So to help balance those individuals with a lot of Vata in their constitution, Ayurveda prescribes a very nourishing and grounding diet with a lot of fats, oils, nuts, root vegetables, grains, and even some meat and dairy to help them build tissue. And Ayurveda prescribes lots of spices. So think ginger, cumin, cinnamon, asafoetida or hing, basil, thyme, fennel, etc., to help them digest, break down, and absorb the nutrients from these heavier foods from which they can then produce healthy tissue. So to help balance their minds and allow them to focus, Ayurveda prescribes routine in and around their meals their waking and sleeping times, and their daily habits and work schedule. Ayurveda asks that they slow down, breathe, and bring their consciousness back into their bodies and out of the ether, so to speak. So now maybe you're thinking, why is Megan telling me about people who have a hard time gaining weight? What does this have to do with weight loss? What does this have to do with trying to manage my weight? Stay with me because we're going to get there in just a moment. Okay, so let me tell you now all about Pitta and Kapha doshas. Pitta dosha is made of the element of fire and a little bit of the water element. And you can think of the water as something that has to exist to contain the fire, like the mucous membranes that line our digestive tracts and protect us from the hydrochloric acid and digestive enzymes that are secreted by the digestive organs to break down our foods. You can think of the fire element as any metabolic or transformative process in the body, like the breaking down of our food into absorbable nutrients and the creation of healthy bodily tissue from those particles. In the mind, you can think of fire as the transformation of sensory input into concepts, ideas, and even wisdom. Pitta by nature is hot due to the fire element, a bit oily due to the water element, and also a bit mobile and unstable due to the constant movement of fire. So if someone has a lot of Pitta in their Ayurvedic constitution, they will have moderate features, moderate bones, moderate skin, because that fire transforms their food into tissues and then burns off the rest. It's very efficient. So people with a great deal of Pitta are able to be pretty moderate and focused in their studies, their projects, and in their work. They also tend to be pretty passionate in their relationships. They have a great ability to focus, lead, and get the job done. When they're out of balance, however, this focus can turn into intensity, and their clear, sharp minds can become really critical, judgmental, and even angry. So again, someone with a great deal of Pitta can overcome these challenges, but they'll always have tendencies toward these imbalances. Oops. Let me go back one slide here. Okay. So Pitta people tend to be able to maintain their weight fairly easily due to that efficient nature of their metabolism and the strong nature of their digestion. Certainly, if Pitta overloads the digestive tract, there can be weight gain. But as soon as they put their mind to it or get back to a balanced way of eating, they will usually have a pretty easy time of dropping that excess weight. In fact, if Pitta gets too intense or out of balance, that fire can turn into a conflagration, causing weight loss as it burns up the tissues of the body. So eventually that fire will dry out all the water element containing it. And then that's going to create some dryness and actually start to look like vata. Remember, vata with air and ether is very dry. So that fire might even completely burn itself out, just like it does in nature when it burns up all of its fuel or everything in its path. And that's going to leave a cold, dry environment, again, looking like a vata imbalance. So this is important to note in that it's one of the ways the doshas can sort of trick us. So what looks like a vata imbalance has actually resulted from a Pitta imbalance. And so keep this in mind for later. When Pitta is out of balance, we ask them to do similar grounding practices that we ask of Vata. We also want to give Pitta some heavier nourishing foods, but we don't want to give them the heating spices that we give Vata. So we focus more on cooling herbs like cilantro, coriander, chamomile, and mint. And we ask Pitta to lighten up and take life a little less seriously by bringing in some play and fun into their day. And we might even ask them to loosen up in their daily schedules, to work less, to lower their intensity level, maybe laugh a little more. Okay, so stay with me. We're getting close to bringing this all together for you. Okay. So finally, we have Kapha, the third dosha. And Kapha is made of earth and water, the heaviest of the 5 Ayurvedic elements. Earth represents all the structures in nature, in the body, so the bodily tissues, and stability in the mind. Water represents anything with innate moisture in the body, so our bodily fluids, as well as flow in the mind. So if someone has a lot of kapha in their constitution, they will tend to have thicker tissues, thicker bones, thicker skin, thicker hair, and also bigger features. So think eyes, lips, nose, etc. They might also have more innate moisture in their body, and that's going to help them produce more sweat, more mucus, and even more breast milk and menstrual fluids in women. Due to the abundance of earth and water in their constitution, kapha people are more easygoing and they do things a bit more slowly than vata and pitta. They tend to be a bit slower in making decisions and completing projects and even moving around in the physical world. So while their mind moves a bit more slowly sometimes, they retain that information really, really well, and they are very dependable. So think tortoise over hare here, okay? So you can imagine then that kapha digestion tends to be a bit slow as well. And so it's important for kapha to avoid overloading the digestive system by keeping portions a bit smaller and maybe even fasting sometimes to increase the element of ether or space in their digestive system so they can move a bit more. That's the increased air element, and also increase their metabolism. So that's that increased fire element. So when kapha is out of balance, weight gain, lethargy, lack of motivation, being sort of stuck in the mud, which is what happens when earth and water combine, they might even be really resistant to change or stubborn and set in their ways. So to balance kapha back out, we want to have them do all the things that modern diet culture tells us to do to lose weight. Reduce our portion sizes, eat a plant-based diet, limit carbohydrates, move more to sweat, eat spicy foods and increase the metabolism, sit less. So we also want them to get out of their comfort zone and try something new. Kapha tends to be very attached to a routine. So we're going to ask them to change it up and vary their day-to-day schedule. We might also ask them to let go of their attachments to possessions or even relationships that are no longer serving them in the hope that their bodies will follow that cue, letting go of excess weight that's also no longer serving them. Okay, so we've established that weight gain is a kapha imbalance, right? Too much earth and water. And so now you might already be asking the important questions like, well, I really identify with vata, but I consider myself overweight. So which am I? Am I kapha or am I vata? That's a great question. And that's where we need to differentiate your nature with your imbalance. So your Ayurvedic constitution is also called your prakruti. And there's Stewie telling us hi in the background. It's the unique, he's very excited about prakruti versus vikruti. So it's the unique combination of the doshas with which you were conceived. Okay, so think of it as the expression of the elements through your genes. So if you have a lot of vata in your original constitution or your prakruti, you'll always have tendencies toward all the vata things, right? Like anxiety, worry, fear, inability to focus, variable digestion, dryness, all those things that are caused by air and ether elements, those dry, cold, mobile, and unstable elements. So these symptoms could also be considered your vikruti, which in a nutshell, it means your current imbalance. So what are you working with right now? And for someone with a lot of vata, that's usually what I mentioned before. Remember, anxiety, constipation, gas and bloating after meals, dry skin. For someone with a lot of pitta in their original constitution or their prakruti, remember pitta is fire, a little bit of water, their imbalances might look like anger, criticism, workaholism, burning digestion, diarrhea, skin rashes. For someone with a lot of kapha in their original constitution or prakruti, their imbalances or vikruti will usually look like those things we just talked about: lethargy, sleepiness after meals, slow digestion, excess mucus in the body or even in their stool, swelling or edema, metabolic issues. Okay, so all those things that are caused by an excess of earth and water, heaviness and slowness and dullness. But any constitution or prakruti could have an imbalance or Vikruti in any of the doshas, in two of the doshas, in all three of the doshas. So could you be largely Vata in your Prakruti or Pitta in your Prakruti, but have a Kapha imbalance or Vikruti like weight gain? Absolutely. Okay, so one of the beautiful things about Ayurveda, and one of the really important take-home messages I want to bring to you today, is that Ayurveda seeks to pinpoint the root cause of our imbalances. That's why it's such a wonderful system of medicine. And this is important when we talk about weight gain, and that I rarely see a Kapha constitution come to me needing or wanting to lose weight. Why, you ask? Well, I think Kapha people have kind of figured out how to balance their issues. They're just not that hungry most of the time. And if they eat too much, they really pay the price. So they're not always the most interested in change as well. So I see a great deal of Vata and Pitta constitutions or Prakrutis coming in to work on weight loss. They don't like the current state of affairs in their bodies. They're uncomfortable. They want to change it, and fast. Right? But here's the kicker. This mentality of I'm uncomfortable and I want to change it right now, right away, is what caused the weight gain in the first place. Okay. And so now it's kind of the big reveal here is that your Vata and or your Pitta imbalance can actually cause your Kapha imbalance or your weight gain. Okay. So it might not be mind-blowing because I've kind of led you here. I've explained a lot of the things behind this imbalance, but it's really interesting to think that moving too much, doing too much, overloading our senses can actually cause our bodies to get bigger, right? So let's make sense of that from an Ayurvedic perspective. How does this type of weight gain work? It's helpful to recall that Vata is made of air, that's movement, and ether, that's space. It's also helpful to note that anytime we change, Vata increases. So think of the nature of change. There's movement from one thing to another. Again, that's the air element. And you have to give up one thing for another. So that creates a space or a void. That's the ether element, if you recall. So even change that is considered good, like let's say marriage, forces you to give up some freedoms that come with being a single person. Even getting a promotion at work forces you to give up some freedoms that come with less responsibility. On the other hand, we have changes that are considered bad, right? Like losing a loved one, death. And so that can create a really big space, a great deal of ether, and therefore a lot of Vata in our lives, Vata dosha. So what happens when you make big changes all the time, or even little changes all the time? Here's an example I see a lot. Getting a divorce, moving to a new city, starting a new job, and then getting involved in a new relationship. That's a lot of air. It's a lot of movement or change, and ether. It's a lot of leaving or giving up things, people, and places. Here's another example, losing a lot of weight in a short amount of time. So let's say you gave up carbohydrates for a ketogenic diet, right? There's definitely some ether there. We had to give up our carbs. You adopted intermittent fasting, more ether or space, right? Because your stomach is empty for a large part of the day. And then you took up a really rigorous high intensity interval training program, right? So lots of air, lots of movement, and the kind that really tends to aggravate Vata because it's stopping and starting, those bursts of activity. Okay, so you get the idea. Change and movement create Vata. Okay, so then what happens when you don't bring in opposite qualities to balance out the Vata, right? That's how Ayurveda helps balance, right? We talked about balance Vata. We bring in nourishment, grounding, heavier things, warm things, well-spiced things, right? So yeah, you guessed it. Vata just runs wild. So did you know that dosha actually means flaw, or more literally stain? And so the job of the doshas is actually just to completely express themselves, fully express themselves, run away with you, so to speak. So our job is to balance them out. Okay, so what happens to the person who gets a divorce, moves to a new city, starts a new job, begins a new relationship, and never slows down long enough to truly take care of themselves? So I'm willing to bet they either get sick and or they gain some weight. Similarly, what's the ending for the person who did too much, too fast by losing a bunch of weight in a short amount of time? Sadly, they usually end up gaining the weight right back, right? And maybe even a little bit more. So the bottom line is if you don't balance out Vata by slowing down, getting into a routine around sleeping and working and eating nourishing food in the right way at the right times, then your body will do it for you. So you'll be drawn to things that comfort you. And I don't know about you, but for me, that's food. So because of the way we evolved through the millennia, the human brain craves sugar and fat to increase all those feel-good hormones in the brain and also to store up for another famine, right? Or a diet as your body might experience a famine or a food shortage in modern times. So if you're depriving your body of food by dieting all the time, your ancestral brain thinks you're in a time of famine. So when you finally break down and break open the bag of cookies or whatever it is, it's your brain is going to persuade you to hoard those calories until it's sure there's no threat of starvation. And comfort food, moreover, consists largely of the elements of earth and water, which create tissues and fluids in the body necessary for survival. So these elements and our bodily tissues also ground us. So if you've been floating off into the ether on a Vata cloud of activity and change, putting on weight is the body's way of making you heavier and bringing you back down to earth or grounding you, so to speak. So again, if you don't take the time to ground yourself through moderation and daily practices, basic self-care like sleep, then your body will do it on its own with a big kapha hug just for you. And so now you've still got that Vata imbalance and you've got a kapha imbalance too now, right? So thanks a lot. So don't take my word for it. Science tells us, that if we don't get enough sleep or our stress levels rise, our hunger hormone increases, that ghrelin. So at the same time, our satiation hormones, the ones that tell us we're full, the leptin, those decrease. And then our stress hormones like cortisol that tell us to hold on to fat to prepare for imminent danger or potential famine, those stress hormones increase, right? So it's just this perfect storm. So I also want to recognize that if you've got a lot of pitta or drive in your constitution, then this can cause you to take on too much as well. The fire of pitta's intensity can burn very brightly, creating a similar environment in which a person might adopt extreme practices, extreme work hours, even extreme ways of thinking. The air of Vata, though, is needed to fan the flames of Pitta, right? We have to have air in order to have a fire. So now Vata and Pitta become partners in crime. That's what I like to call them, partners in crime. And they'll push a person to do more and in a smaller window of time and maybe even faster. So, or maybe even multitask, right? That's something that we're all, I think, guilty of and that our society sort of pushes us to do, to accomplish and achieve more and to balance all the things that we're sort of asked to do and manage these days. So that fire of Pitta can sustain us for a while, especially if you have a lot of Pitta in your Prakriti, in your natural constitution. But this typically leads to burnout. And that can look like a breakdown, a complete inability to do anything anymore, depression, an autoimmune disorder, even cancer. So at the very least, we can be drawn to unsupportive coping mechanisms like overeating, which again can cause a kapha imbalance on top of a pitta or even a pitta vata imbalance. Okay, so let's talk about the important stuff, right? What can I do about this? How do I bring myself back into balance? From an Ayurvedic perspective, like I mentioned before, we always want to address the root of the problem. So you'll want to consult with your friendly neighborhood Ayurvedic practitioner to determine your Prakriti or your underlying constitution, right? Are you a Vata working with a Kapha imbalance? Are you a Kapha working with a Kapha imbalance? You get the idea. The online quizzes that you'll find are often very helpful, but sometimes they don't differentiate clearly between prakruti and vikruti, right? Your underlying constitution and what's actually out of balance. And then you'll also want to look at what exactly has happened in your life that's causing you to gain weight. What do your daily habits look like? Do you have any, or is everything changing from day to day? And then after that, bring in diet, lifestyle, and daily habits that work best for you, because each individual is unique with unique and different needs. And so that being said, I'm going to give you some solutions today that any constitution can use to heal their relationship with food and the underlying causes of their kapha imbalance or weight gain. So one of the first things, kind of a big broad topic I want to talk about, is taking back your relationship with food. Working on digestion is one of the highest, if not the highest, physical practice in Ayurveda. And so your body is your vehicle for contributing love and light into the world. And Ayurveda wants you to treat it as such. So how do we build that body and its tissues? Through the food we eat, of course. We literally are what we eat. Eating, therefore, is a sacred act. We do it at least 3 times a day. Therefore, you have at least 3 opportunities every single day to get back in touch with and even take control over the type of tissues, the type of body that you're building. How you eat is even more important than what you eat with regard to building this healthy tissue and a strong digestion. So here are the guidelines to creating a healthy eating environment at least 3 times a day. I'm going to break these down for you. This is a big one. At the same times each day, sit down, eliminate distractions, and create a calm environment. And we're going to unpack that. Okay. So at the same times, create a routine around your meals. Eat breakfast each morning at the same time, designate a lunch break and actually take it at the same time each day. Same thing for dinner. Okay. Sit down. So no standing at the counter over the food container. Put your meal on a plate or in a bowl, put it on the table, and then sit down to eat it. No one ever created healthy tissue by wolfing down a sandwich while they're driving in their car. I don't think they have. I'm pretty sure. Eliminate distractions. So no TV, no podcast, no reading, no work. Sorry, right? I know that's going to be a tough one for a lot of people, but your brain prioritizes a low level of distraction all the time over digestion. So if you're engaging the brain in the task of emails, the drama of the news, your favorite TV show, it's not going to give digestion the proper energy it needs to know which and how much of each digestive enzyme it needs to secrete to properly digest your food. This leads to gas, bloating, burping, reflux, all those fun digestive symptoms. And then, let's face it, how long does it really take to eat a plate full of food? Maybe 10 minutes when you really think about it, especially if you're not distracted. And so I think it's doable when you put it in those terms, right? We can all sacrifice 10 minutes of our day a couple times a day to give our digestive system a fighting chance. And then create a calm environment. So this could be anything from agreeing not to talk about politics and religion at the dinner table to eating in silence, if that's agreeable to you and the people you eat with. It could also mean committing to just getting away from your desk at work to eat lunch outside with a coworker in the kitchen or the lounge, or even just sitting in your car if you have no other peaceful options. I have patients who will go eat lunch in their car and they'll park on the roof of the garage and look around at the scenery. It's kind of a really nice little escape for them. So this could even mean something like always putting fresh flowers on your breakfast table, light the candles at dinner, put out the good china for lunch. Again, we're trying to create something sacred out of the seemingly mundane. And that's one of the beauties of Ayurveda, is creating a sacred act out of things that you take for granted or do, sort of like clockwork every day. Okay. So number 2, before eating, take 3 deep breaths, a moment of silence, or say grace, if that's in your comfort zone in your tradition. And this is a real game changer for me personally. If I can remember to do this, it's so much easier for me to follow all the other guidelines. my digestive system is so much happier, and I experience less indigestion in general. So I like to put my hands over my food and close my eyes and take 3 deep breaths, just one if that's all I have time for. And I just try to feel gratitude for every being that contributed to my meal. So the people who picked the produce, the animal that may have given its life, the truck drivers who brought it to the store, the workers in the store, the person who cooked it, probably me. So all those things, I try to kind of think of that production chain just for a few seconds. And it just centers me, grounds my nervous system, and reminds me that there are things I need to focus on while I eat. And one of those things is chewing thoroughly. And this one can be groundbreaking. If you're like me and you have a lot of pitta or fire and a really strong appetite, you get hungry, then you probably have a lifelong habit of shoveling food into your mouth and eating it really quickly. And so obviously this is not such a great approach for creating healthy tissue, right? As strong as your digestive system might be, it's going to have a really hard time digesting whole pieces of food. So slowing down and chewing your food can help to eliminate all kinds of problems, from reflux to gas and even chronic diarrhea. Give your digestive system some help and focus on chewing your food to an even consistency before you swallow. There's no magic number of how many times you should chew. It's just sort of, feel it out. When everything feels like it's broken down pretty well, it's time. So again, if I take those 3 deep breaths before I dive in, I remember to do this way more often than I don't. And number 4. So you only eat until you're about 70% full. And this is the key to finding an ideal supportive body weight that's right for your frame. If you can give yourself the space and the patience and the time to find what this means for you, it can be incredibly rewarding. And so this is going to ensure that you never feel stuffed or overloaded in your digestive system, because that can create some toxicity, or what Ayurveda calls amma. And eventually it can lead to illness and weight gain in the body. So again, this can really take some time, especially if you never sit to eat, if you don't take meal breaks, and you don't have a routine yet or rituals around your food. You probably aren't paying too much attention to the natural hunger and fullness signals yet. And that's okay, because you're going to now, right? Yes. Okay. So number 5, wait at least 3 hours in general before eating again to allow your system to properly digest your food. According to Ayurveda, there are 3 stages of digestion, and they happen in the stomach, and then the small intestines, and then the large intestines, in that order, right? That's the order of your digestive tract. So if your last meal is still being worked on, say in the small intestines, where a great deal of nutritional absorption takes place, and you go and eat something else because you're bored or anxious or whatever, then your body has to take energy away from that digestive process in the small intestines to then go back up to the stomach and work on whatever you just ate. So now neither process is getting the right amount of attention. And this is usually when problems like gas, bloating, reflux, and diarrhea really love to rear their ugly heads. And I would like to add just a caveat. Wait until you're actually hungry again to eat, especially if you're really working with this 70% full principle. It can take some time to get this right? If you don't eat quite enough, you might be genuinely hungry 2 hours after a meal or even sooner. And that's okay, right? So in the name of trying to keep your body from thinking that famine is coming, or sort of uprooting the nervous system, there's no need to deprive yourself just because you're following this arbitrary rule of waiting for 3 hours. It's just a general guideline. So go ahead and eat again, but sit down, take a few breaths, say grace, just think a positive thought, chew really well, and then stop again when you're about 70% full, and keep working on that. Because again, we're very out of touch, I think, with our hunger and fullness signals. Either we've been dieting for our lifetime and we've been, restricting our portions, or just eating a portion size that's really maybe not even meant for us. Maybe it's too small, maybe it's too big. And then we say, okay, we're done, without really checking in and saying, am I satisfied? How do I feel? So give this some time. Be patient with it. You will find the 70% full. And there's one little trick that I want to add, and it's called the first burp. And in Ayurveda, if you really pay attention, it's not a big burp. It's just this little release of air. And it's your body's signal, your stomach's signal of telling you you're 70% full. You're at the perfect amount of food. And sometimes it'll come a bit after you stop eating. Usually, if you eat slowly enough and chew your food, it's another reason to do that, then you'll notice it. Again, it's very subtle. You're the only one who will probably notice it. But when you start to pay attention, you'll find it, and it's actually pretty cool. So that's a good reason to just sort of experiment with slowing down and chewing really well and being mindful of the eating process, creating that sacred space for it. Try to see if you can find that first burp. Okay, always makes me laugh when I talk about it. And then there's one more thing here. If it doesn't bother you to go a little longer than 3 hours to eat, waiting a bit more can give your body an opportunity to use some stored fat as fuel. So this can aid in weight loss efforts if that's what you're working on. I do want to point out, however, that if you have a lot of vata in your constitution or your prakruti, that this could backfire. So going a long time without eating for vata can increase that ether, that emptiness or space, and can cause you to feel ungrounded or even dizzy. And then you might reach for whatever junk food's available, right? And maybe even binge on it. So instead, vata does better with smaller, more frequent meals, eaten when truly hungry. And this is going to be more difficult for vata natures, but it's really worth cultivating. And that noticing those true hunger and fullness signals can get vata out of the clouds and back into their bodies, which was the problem that created the weight gain in the first place. Remember, being sort of out of touch with routines and rhythms and signals. So if you've got more pitta and or kapha in your constitution or your prakruti, you might do better with going a little longer between meals. But the bottom line is you want to pay attention to your body. Set an alarm or an alert on your phone or your calendar to remind you to check in with yourself throughout the day if needed, right? It's sometimes helpful to use an external source that reminds us to stop and check in and see where we are until our body, right, and our mind and our consciousness can kind of get on board. Okay. So sixth guideline for healthy eating here is to sit for 10 or 15 minutes after a meal or take a stroll. And this is a tough one for me personally, because I'm ready to get back to business after I eat, right? It's like, let's go. So I'm ready to do another task or get back into whatever I was doing right after I eat. But I'm getting better at reminding myself, it's still a work in progress, but I'm getting better at reminding myself to sit and read something for fun. That works for me. Like a magazine or a good book. It's a real privilege that I can carve out the time for. But if the weather permits, you could take just a little 5-minute stroll. It's a great way to aid in your digestion because the movement of walking helps with peristalsis, or the movement of the smooth muscles that line the digestive tract and move everybody downward and kind of smush your food around in your stomach. And we're not talking about power walking or working up a sweat, right? It's just a stroll. Okay, vata and okay pitta. So nothing intense, nothing too fast. You want to take it easy. If you get too fired up about this, then you might actually impede your digestion, right? And start shunting blood into the muscles that need to work really hard instead of the digestive tract. So that could give you some cramping, some diarrhea, some gas and bloating, and we're trying to avoid that. So again, take it easy, enjoy the scenery, notice your breath. And we're trying to get you back into your body, right? Noticing its processes, noticing its needs. And this is an interesting one. So take no more than a half a cup of water or liquid with your meals, because any more than that will interfere with the digestive process and your ability to note when you're at that 70% full mark. So if you have something like soup or stew with your meal, you really don't need to add much liquid at all. Additionally, the beverages you take should be warm, especially if you have a lot of vata in your constitution. Remember, vata is cold and dry. We don't want to add more cold quality. Even room temperature is better than iced, right? Because if you have even a lot of pitta in your constitution, think of it this way: when you put in something iced or cold, the digestive system really has to roar up. Your metabolism has to really enkindle itself to bring that cold water back down, or up rather, bring it back up to body temperature, right? So that's like a temporary surge in heat. And pitta, as you know, is already hot enough. So even for pitta, those ice beverages are often problematic. But on that note, drinking water between meals is really important in your weight loss efforts, because every organ needs water to function efficiently. And a great deal of the time, we can mistake thirst for hunger. So sipping water or even some herbal tea, something non-caffeinated throughout the day, is really important for keeping all the tissues of your body hydrated and to keep you satiated between your meals and snacks. Guzzling water often just kind of overtaxes the kidneys. You can really only absorb about half a cup at a time over maybe the course of 30 minutes or so. So you want to keep a reusable water bottle or a thermos of herbal tea on hand, sip it frequently between meals, hold off maybe 30 minutes before a meal or an hour after to give your digestive system some room so you don't overload it with liquid. And it's just practice and habit formation. So be patient with yourself as you start to sort of reshape how you eat. These are a lot of guidelines. So what I would suggest is just working on maybe one of them a week, or one of them even a month, right? Because you have your whole life to really work on these tendencies, and it's worth working on slowly, because we don't want to create too much change too fast. Otherwise, we end up with more vata. Okay, so we want to be careful with that. And then these are just a few tips for vata digestive imbalances. So if you have a lot of dryness, anxiety, variability in your digestion, like gas, bloating, constipation, or even alternating diarrhea and constipation, you'll find that raw food is really not your friend. It's very hard to digest for vata. So instead of salads and smoothies, which are cold and drying, remember vata is already cold and dry, we don't want to increase those qualities. We want to bring in soups and stews and chilies and stir fries instead, right? They're warming, they're nourishing, they're comfort foods. And so that could even take the place of other foods that have become comforting, but aren't that supportive, right? Like sugar, white flour, etc. Also, vata digestion is variable and often low. So as I mentioned a little earlier, so those smaller, more frequent meals might suit a vata constitution or an underlying vata imbalance better than those 3 squares a day. So, but remember to apply those principles we talked about. Eat when you're truly hungry, stop when you're 70% full, bring in those mindfulness practices like grace and chewing. And then since vata can be variable or even low, vata digestion can be variable or low, your food should be seasoned really well. So use lots of yummy spices, ginger, cumin, fennel, turmeric, basil, thyme, oregano, all the spices. But since vata is very dry by nature, a little salt can actually go a long way to keep moisture in the tissues of the body. And the same goes for oil. You can use it in your cooking, drizzle a little bit of high quality extra virgin olive oil or sesame oil onto your cooked food or the finished product or the prepared food if you're purchasing it. And don't be afraid of oil and salt. Okay, many of your health problems might actually stem from dryness as a root cause. And these things will help immensely in grounding and calming and satisfying vata and hydrating the tissues of the body. And, think of it this way, your nervous system is swimming in all of your fascial and interstitial and fluid tissues. So when those fluids are replenished and those tissues are well hydrated, the nervous system has a really strong, conducive environment and can grow healthier as well, right? So you stay hydrated, your nervous system stays calmer. And also don't be afraid of carbs. Specifically whole grains, okay, like rice, quinoa, bulgur. Those can be incredibly nourishing and grounding for vata and pitta. The active and often overly active brains and nervous systems of vata and pitta need that replenishment from the B vitamins. And so these foods can offer really good feel-good hormones as well, like serotonin, right? And these are the things that they cause our systems to emit. And so while low carb diets might get really fast results, that's not what we're looking for here. Remember, we want awareness, nourishment, and sustainability. So Ayurveda gives us these long-term solutions to the underlying or root cause of our imbalances, right? So let's really embrace that idea of sustainability. Okay, and then I just want to use the last few minutes to talk or shift from food to our mind and emotions because they play such a large part in our daily lives and also in our relationship with food and our bodies. So that all of those healthy eating guidelines were step one. So it's a lot. There's so much you can work on there. So remember to take your time. And now step two, you want to take back your relationship with your emotions. So if you recognize and pay attention to them, you might not feel the need to eat them instead. And what I mean by that is, we often use food as a comforting coping mechanism. I certainly do. And when we have emotions we don't want to recognize or deal with, sometimes it's easier to sort of stuff things down and pack ourselves in to feel, as one patient has described it, almost like you're being hugged from the inside, right? To kind of get that feeling of grounding and security that only lasts temporarily, right? Because those emotions don't always go away. And one of the best ways I've found to deal with my emotions is to write them down first thing in the morning and or before I go to bed. And so if you're resistant to the idea of journaling, that's okay. I know a lot of people are, and I certainly was for a really long time. Sometimes in the morning, I just write down my dreams. That's all I really have the bandwidth for. Sometimes I just write down what I have to do that day because that's what's in my head, right? Is the to-do list, or even just some ideas for a project that's on my mind. I used to hate the idea of journaling. And as I mentioned, I don't really know why, but I guess it's because, like so many of us, I didn't really want to address my feelings. I felt like I didn't have time for that. My pitta efficiency brain was like, well, that's not a productive use of your time. But it really is. It's so productive, I've found. I just had to demonstrate it to myself. I just had to practice. And I think also the mind can be a scary place, so it's hard to address or look at some of the things that are in our minds sometimes. But what I found is that if I approach this journaling with kind of a lighthearted attitude, like, okay, I don't have to get too serious. Let me just, like I mentioned, write down what I have to do that day. It's so much easier. And then it usually leads into how I'm feeling. So I'll wake up, do a few morning self-care practices. I pour myself some tea, and then I bring my tea and my notebook with me if it's warm outside, and it's getting there in Utah right now. But I bring it outside and I write as the hummingbirds come to the feeder, or as the birds are, I can hear them chirping and making their nests around me. Or if it's cold outside, I'll just kind of curl up on the couch under a blanket. And that's a really nice, comforting thing to do. So it's something it's a ritual I've started actually looking forward to. And then I promise myself that I can read the morning headlines, I can check my email, and then I can drink my tea because it's cool enough at that point, right after I do a few minutes of journaling, right? So I get this immediate reward for taking just maybe 10, 15 minutes to write down what's in my head. And then the payoff for the rest of the day is huge, right? Since my thoughts are now done on paper, they're not whirling through my head all day, sending me into this thought spiral that results in maybe sitting down with a bag of chips or candy because I needed some emotional comfort, right? And I might do that anyway, but that's okay. I forgive myself. But, I already took care of myself, and it was before I even checked my email. Right? So it's a win-win. But you have to find what works for you. And I know that for many of my clients or patients, writing down their thoughts or their to-dos before they go to bed is what works the best. And I like to call this the mind dump, right? You dump out the contents of your mind before bed so they don't wake you up at 2 or 3 a.m. If you still wake up at 2 a.m., now you can tell yourself not to worry because you already wrote that down. I'll look at it in the morning. Remember, brain? We already got that on paper. So writing is a really effective tool for dealing with emotions, and it can help you avoid, like I said, kind of eating your feelings later. So if you haven't already started this practice, I really encourage you to try it. Set a time each day that you'll do it. Like I said, first thing in the morning is usually the best time for me to do things that I have some resistance to, because I know I'll get them out of the way and they'll be done and I don't have to worry about them later. I tack that onto my morning tea. But you can track it onto anything that you already do every day. Maybe it's your bedtime ritual, or maybe you do it after lunch. Maybe that's how you sit, for 10 or 15 minutes after lunch and allow yourself to digest. You can tack it onto anything that works for you. And then finally, I want to talk about taking back our relationship with stillness, and then also movement. So this is going to be hard for Vata in that they don't feel very comfortable without motion of the body or the mind. They see this mobility, remember the mobile quality of air, as part of the creative process. And maybe it is. But in order to have balance, right, remember that sustainability, you have to bring in opposite qualities of the doshas in order to prevent them from running away with us and eventually causing disease. So we have to find a way for Vata to be okay with being still, again, so we don't end up eating our feelings later, because that's the only way we get comfort and balance. This is going to be hard for Pitta as well, because they often don't see the value in sitting over doing and productivity, right? That was my brain process approach to journaling. But maybe a Pitta mind will respond to something like, hey, if we spend just 10 minutes in stillness each day, we can be even more productive later. Same for Vata, right? If we calm and ground now, we'll actually have more energy and freedom for creativity later. The bottom line is, if you don't create stillness somewhere, your nervous system never gets a break, and you never train the mind to focus on the present moment. So we age faster, we turn to food for comfort, we miss opportunities that come our way because we're distracted all the time. So you want to find a way each day to sit in silence, whether it's through a meditation practice, and that could be guided meditation. It's not necessarily silence, but at least you're not the one doing the talking, right? Your mind is guided by something else other than your own thoughts. A breathing practice, a restorative yoga session, even sitting in a window and just watching nature, watching the birds. Whatever it is for you, do it every day. And again, tack it onto something you already do every day. So for me, I tack this onto my morning shower and self-oil massage practice called Abhyanga in Ayurveda. If you're not familiar with self-oil massage, it's lovely. But I need to allow some time for the oil to absorb into my skin before I get dressed. So I put on my robe and I sit to do my breathing, pranayama, and my meditation practices. And this keeps my blood pressure down. It literally has brought my blood pressure down, clears my energy before I interact with my clients and my patients. And it gives me a sense of calm and focus, and it sort of seeps into every part of my day. So if I do this in the morning, I'm less prone to making unsupportive food choices later. And I'll tell you, it's the first thing that goes when I get busy. And it's the first thing that I find I really miss. I notice it when I'm not doing it. So it's a practice. Everybody's a work in progress. And then last but not least, I mentioned take back your relationship with movement. So this can be a really tough one. We grow really attached to our exercise routines, often because we're trying to burn calories, we're afraid of gaining weight, we need to make up for our previous food choices or sort of punish ourselves, right, for doing things we consider bad. And I encourage you to find a way of exercising that you enjoy, that you actually look forward to. And for me, that means I want to change it up a little bit every day. So I might do yoga one day a week, Pilates one day a week, circuit training using my own body weight, or like calisthenics one day, maybe a hike, maybe a treadmill or elliptical workout. And this keeps me engaged and having fun. But I do make sure that there are two things that are always the same. And that's my exercise routine is the same time every day. And that I'm using Ayurvedic principles to keep my intensity levels in check. Okay, so same time each day, right? That ensures my Vata isn't running away with me. I'm creating those grounding routines. My nervous system isn't left to guess what's going to happen next. It knows we do our workout at this time every day, even though it may be a little different each day. And then the Ayurvedic principles to keep my intensity levels in check. Ayurveda says exercise should only be intense enough to just break a sweat, and then you cool down. So it's a bell curve. You work it up, and then as soon as you get there, you immediately start to bring it back down. And so for me, that's about 20 or 30 minutes of exercise. And I make sure I'm always able to breathe through my nose. That's another really big one. And that might take some practice, especially if you have things like deviated septums or just aren't used to breathing through the nose during exercise. But it really can regulate your intensity level. And so once I can't breathe through my nose and my nose alone, I know I'm pushing too hard, that my nervous system's going to have to work way too hard to bring me back down to homeostasis, right? That's too much air movement, too much fire intensity. So 20 or 30 minutes might not sound like much, but I do it every day. So over a week, I'm getting about 140, maybe 210 minutes of exercise. And that's right in line with what the American Heart Association Association recommends, which is about 150 minutes a week of moderate exercise. And that prevents a myriad of diseases and lowers your risk of all kinds of health challenges. So if you think of it this way, if you're trying for an hour a day, you might only hit the mark a few times, maybe even only once a week. But 20 or 30 minutes every day, or even start with 15 or 20 minutes every day, then it's going to add up to more than 60 minutes, right? That you might only do once a week. And it creates grounding, nourishing, reliable routines. And that's going to help balance out Vata. That balances out that underlying cause of so many people's weight gain. So it's really all about balance so that we break that cycle of punishment with exercise and reward with food, right? And a little each day goes a really, really long way. Oops. I keep doing that. Sorry, guys. So I really hope this gives you some tools to work with in your personal journey. And I hope too that this gives you an idea of what a sustainable way of living and eating and exercising can look like. It's really about the journey and not necessarily about the destination. Remember, Ayurveda is a lifetime of practicing, for good or bad. I think it's a good thing because you have an opportunity every day to reconnect and again turn those mundane acts into something sacred. So use these tools at every meal, at every workout, every day, and you might not even care what the number on the scale says anymore. You'll develop a sense of confidence in your ability to take care of and nourish yourself, to know what you need. And over time, your body will let go of what's not serving it anymore. And this could be anything from excess weight to even a health condition you thought you might be on medication for the rest of your life. The possibilities are truly, truly endless when you start to put faith in your own ability to heal. So please let me know if you have any questions or if you'd like to set up a consultation to learn more about bringing things into balance. And I'm so grateful that you joined me today. I'm going to turn off the recording and then take any questions we have.